Let's take a trip or flight to the world of science fiction or sci-fi. Sci-fi has captured many of our imaginations in all forms of media, whether through books, movies, and naturally the topic of this video and channel, games. None more ambitious than sci-fi games in the virtual online realm, a realm where games go online and mimic both our world and new ones altogether. That makes virtual gaming a perfect place for science fiction to see its full potential realized. Then why haven't there been very many successful virtual worlds set in the science fiction genre? Well, it's almost a double-edged sword. With the beauty of limitless possibilities comes hefty expectations, far greater than fantasy games suffer from. We are covering yet another of the few science fiction worlds, or massive online RPGs. This time Earthrise, developed by Masthead Studios and published by Dutch company Iceberg Interactive. Earthrise was set to be another Star Wars Galaxies, another successful sandbox MMORPG set in the science fiction realm. However, it was abruptly shut down only after 1 year. As we do in this series, we will navigate through a timeline, uncovering various bits of evidence and clues in order to solve the ultimate question of why did Earthrise die? Let's get to the mystery, detectives. I'd like to welcome this video's sponsor, Nexus War, a game where destiny and strategy collide. There are 4 distinct races to choose from, each having distinctive bonuses and advantages, even special heroes to choose from. The humans, which are best for the beginners in my opinion, the Ezons, which are best for jungling, Iocus, which are best for attacking and dealing damage, and finally the Theas, which are defenders that are best for healing and, well, defending. Each race boasts their own mighty heroes, which each player can recruit to form their army, as well as unique architectural styles, special units, and civilization bonuses. For example, Zafar is my favorite hero because he does a lot of damage and is a giant scary lizard looking dude. These heroes such as Zafar, Sintra, Cayuta, etc. can be leveled, power boosted, and improved using RPG style systems. You can even build megastructures though, like Titan docks, research labs, intelligence buildings, and even more, to form your galactic fortresses and buff your troops. Since new players may be worried about catching up with veterans, I'm going to introduce 2 powerful heroes that are easy to get in Nexus War. Logging in for 7 days, each new player can win one of the strongest damage dealers, Zafar, the one that I mentioned, for free. And even though it's a free-to-play game, for only just 1 USD, you will get Hino and almost 700,000 power directly. He's even better than Zafar for mid to late game periods, if you're looking to do a lot of attacking. Just join my alliance, named nerdSlayer Studios, to find a like-minded community of gamers from this channel in Nexus Wars. Enjoy Nexus War for free and help support me by using the exclusive code link or QR code on screen and in the description. The code is NWHeropack, and it can provide you with over $100 worth of rewards. The validity period is until the end of the next month, and thank you for sponsoring this video, Nexus War. Development would begin for Earthrise in early 2005 with very little details. Jumping forward a few years, Masthead, a Bulgarian developer, would announce their first online title, Earthrise. Earthrise was reportedly taking inspiration from Fallout, Borderlands, and Stalker among several other games. More details concerning the game would be Masthead would be utilizing their own engine, as well as crafting the virtual world as a sandbox one where players would create the content themselves with tools that were given to them. Earthrise would also feature classic PvP with customizable power armor, huge mechanized exoskeletons, and an arsenal of weapons to control contested lands and their resources. For most classic sandbox-loving MMO fans, this was ticking all the right boxes. Something interesting to note is that Masthead was also working on Fallout Online, but would end up losing that license after Interplay would give up Fallout to Bethesda. And we will never know what would have become of Fallout Online. And that's surely a video for another time. The first rough gameplay was showcased April 2009, and while the game was likened to being post-apocalyptic, many players including myself felt that it was closer to Cyberpunk or something of the sort, as another online title of the time, Fallen Earth, was more of a clear-cut Fallout-style post-apocalypse for contrast. With rough movement, but functional UI and menu systems, Earthrise's early gameplay was barely proof of concept, but back then that was enough to get any player excited. Masthead Studios was expecting 70 to 80,000 initial subscribers, with room to grow, and were boasting the fact that the game could reach 60 frames at certain parts. These expectations might seem low for those living under the WoW blockbuster effect, but that's more than EVE Online was able to get initially, another popular sci-fi MMO, which was probably the best comparison. If the population wasn't good enough though, not only could the world suffer in functionality depending on how it was designed, and how many players it was designed for, there could potentially not be enough subscribers to keep the game afloat, and the company afloat, since the game wasn't free to play. Earthrise would continue on to its launch February 4th, 2011. Masthead Studios seemed to be operating with next to no marketing budget and probably no budget in general, with very few media outlets picking up the title for review. What reviews I did find from a UK outlet, in this case, I wasn't familiar with. This one would state about their time playing Earthrise. To be fair, Earthrise is a good and engaging game. It's dynamically and organically big, the economy, the path your character takes, the outcomes of the world, and the very core of the game. The key word with Earthrise is potential. The game has bags of it, and I really hope that the initial server glitches never rear their ugly heads again, and that Earthrise can fill a necessary gap in the genre. Earthrise had combat more akin to a shooter, kind of like classic Star Wars Galaxies for those who played pre-CU or CU even, in terms of aiming and shooting. But then it had classic MMO-like abilities and character customization. Speaking of character customization, the game was an open skill system, allowing players to mix and match their own skills as they desired. Technically, Earthrise has 3 factions, one being the Utopian government, there's also the Noir faction, ironically, and the Renegade or neutral players. With a plethora of items and deep crafting systems, Earthrise would offer a number of possibilities there. But to speak more about the issues of the game, which were more numerous than the pluses of the game, Earthrise would have a lot of issues, and some were very glaring. First being that the game itself and the engine that they were using was an in-house one, and was constantly having performance issues and lagging, especially during PvP. Reasons for using an in-house engine would be cost-related, but also technically there isn't really an MMO engine. You have to do reverse engineering no matter which one you end up choosing. The issue being when you're building a super ambitious open-world sandbox sci-fi game, performance is much harder and much more magnified. If it doesn't perform well, there's very little instance content to somehow swing the balance or allow for a lagless way to play the game, like most theme park games could have, or even MMOs with both types of content. The other major issue of Earthrise was that the content and what features the game offered, while on the surface seemed similar to Star Wars Galaxies, upon close examination, such comparisons would just fall apart. That's because in Star Wars Galaxies you can do way more than just fight or craft. You can cook, you can sing, you can dance, you can create your own customizable cities. The beauty of sci-fi MMOs is limitless possibilities, remember? Something that Star Wars Galaxies gave its fans. But Earthrise was seemingly a very small version of that dream or desire. And when you lack the rest of those systems to boost your game in unison, the sum of your parts becomes heavily based on what parts you do have. For example, in this case, combat and crafting. Combat was serviceable, but nothing different or impressive, and since the game lagged a lot, it wasn't really impressive. Crafting was very difficult to understand and not particularly intuitive or fun, which mattered more than being deep or complex. So while some players could see potential in Earthrise, reaching some of those heights, at the time I couldn't help but notice it was missing all of those parts that I mentioned in my favorite MMO, Star Wars Galaxies, that made the game special. Including it being Star Wars itself, I should add. That can't be understated. Star Wars already gave players a pre-existing universe with characters and established rules that made it easy for players to get involved and engaged with the world right away. Earthrise had next to no world identity or lore, and had no previous movies to lean back on, so in most cases it just felt like the world consisted of zones with a bunch of enemies placed onto them in random locations, and not an actual world with points of interest and such. Within just a year, Earthrise would be announced to be shutting down. It was safe to say that those projections weren't met, and Earthrise being a subscription-based MMO wasn't helping their accessibility. Masthead Studios had cited difficulty making the game work in 2011 despite various efforts, and also admitted to launching the game in an unfinished state, which is not completely uncommon in the MMO industry in my defense of them, but the problem is that there was even less finished here. There was a heartfelt message here though. Masthead would express the difficulties of finding a publisher to fund their attempt, and how the burden was being placed on indie developers with little resources instead to create innovation. This is actually true, and a large reason that innovation is being stifled in the MMO and MMORPG industries. They're expensive games and hard to garner support for. Masthead deciding to take the risk and attempt it regardless without the ideal circumstances was commendable, but thus their failure was a lot more expected. But it is commendable for them to have even tried, because without indie developers trying to make MMOs, well, we wouldn't really get any. That's the problem right now. As much as we can commend titles like them for even trying, they welcomed considerable risk, and thus the outcome was decided. In a totally unsuspected turn of events, an unknown German studio would prop up with the goal and desire of resurrecting Earthrise May 2012. Silent Future, as they were known by, had purchased the Earthrise license and was working on updating the project to relaunch it. Silent Future would encounter a number of problems in their attempt, however. For starters, although they were able to keep 20 of the original team members involved in the team, because those members were in Bulgaria, according to my sources, there were serious concerns about workload and work culture clashing. This would slow down work some. Another issue that the SF team was encountering was every time they fixed a bug, they were encountering new ones. The issues with running your own engine system rears its ugly head again, and spaghetti code like this is kind of the problem of such a thing, where suddenly you fix something and you break 10 other things. Also, in this case, the masters of the engine really understand how to use the engine, but that's problematic because nobody else does. Now, where things got a bit confusing for me concerning the game's direction, at least the reboot's game direction, and SF clashing with the hardcore audience of Earthrise was, well, for starters, as my sources explained to me, there were some issues concerning the open world PvP system that allowed for loot, but what I found perplexing was more so how the problem was being framed. It showed a clear misunderstanding of what it takes to make a full loot MMO, or even one that has hardcore PvP. To elaborate, Earthrise had a number of problems, and the open world PvP wasn't really the worst of them. As the problem was pitched to me, players would just camp the gates and kill players and steal their loot. And that's kind of the point of such a game, but the problem is that that's not the most fun way to experience the game, especially if you're the player getting killed before you even have any recourse. Now, only if players could ensure their loot, so if they lost it, it wouldn't be that big of a deal. Or maybe NPCs could just protect the players in these specific zones. If it sounds like I'm innovating, well, I'm not. These are 20-year-old mechanics that have been used to solve dickhead PvP players who have existed since the beginning of the genre. You need multiple tools to deal with these guys. Court systems, guards, and actual punishment works, just like the real world. But if you aren't aware of how early PvP systems have failed and often will still fail, then you'll miss this. That's why it's imperative when trying to create a game, or in this case revitalize one, to actually understand the genre and source materials before getting involved, especially regarding the community, who basically feels like you're now taking control of their world. My guess is that no one on the SF team was qualified or aware of how to work with such systems. This led to them making hasty decisions to overhaul the system completely, and probably just to work with what they had, right? But hardcore players would answer this with vitriol after learning about the update due to a developer leaking it whenever they were drunk. What proceeded to happen next was a toxic fanbase basically overwhelming a new inexperienced developer who meant well but wasn't equipped to deal with the fanbase nor the game itself. This got so bad that it led to mass chargebacks, fraud, and even in some cases, DDoS attacks on the servers. What wasn't reported by my sources, ironically, was that SF was selling founder packs, which is relevant because the game was supposedly going free to play, and yet SF clearly wanted or still needed some funding in the meantime. This is probably what people were charging back, right? Otherwise, what would they even be charging back? So it seems that not all was what it seemed, which is often the case whenever you're given information from multiple sources. But the information I was given was imperative nonetheless. Even so, a toxic fanbase overwhelming developers and keeping other players from engaging, it sounds all too familiar for me. One of my favorite MMOs, Darkfall Online, also lacked supporting systems and a proper punishment system, so although I had great memories, many players didn't. And the solution isn't and was never to just burn the system down. PvP never works. Otherwise, successful titles like EVE and the widely successful survival genre, most conveniently forgotten about, wouldn't exist, right? It's rare that the solution ever in a series of solutions is just get rid of the thing entirely. Especially when you compare worlds to our world. Our world has plenty of actual player-to-player conflict, whether it be your job, whether it be somebody cut you off when you're driving to work, whether it be you're doing a sport, whether it be you actually serve in a military or actually do combat, so on and so forth. Conflict and combat will always be around because it's human nature, in a weird and not so weird way like it. The character creator footage would be showcased sometime in May of 2013, and that would be the last update that we would see from Earthrise or on Earthrise from SF. Fast forward a number of years and there were articles being written about what happened to the Earthrise reboot. According to my sources, the project was technically not cancelled, though there doesn't seem to be a path to launch, nor alternatives to such. So effectively, it is cancelled, unfortunately, which means we have reached the end of our timeline, and if you haven't been paying attention to the clues along the way, well, no worries. We are about to do our final deduction to summarize everything. That music playing in the background means that, short video or not, we have obtained enough clues and bits of evidence to solve the case. Why did Earthrise die? It was unfinished. Lack of supporting systems. It had a lack of charm and just overall worldliness. Unrealistic business strategy and expectations. Low budget. It had a failed revival project. Another title to add to the short but ever-growing list of failed sci-fi MMOs and MMORPGs. Something I don't delight in saying, quite frankly. I must admit, the sci-fi genre is my favorite, whether through Star Wars or Star Trek or anime or more. Seeing it struggle so much in the virtual world space is painful. I am unbelievably biased too, but I can't help but feel like those pains and struggles are just growing pains in a young industry, and that sci-fi MMOs will start to take hold and offer gameplay experiences in the future that fantasy MMOs just can't. After all, sci-fi has a knack for predicting the future, in more ways than one. I see virtual worlds and virtual gaming as the future, and that's ripe for science fiction. Thanks for watching.
So what are we in for?
It's not too bad. A lot of walkers,